Welcome back to World History 24, where my older sister Ellie teaches me world history in order in just 24 hours. My name is Charlie. In our last episode, we covered the years 480 to 300 BCE. We visited Israel during the Second Temple period, when much of the Bible was composed. We discussed the massive Nok civilization with their elaborate terracotta figurines in Nigeria. On the other side of the world, the Adena and Hopewell's mounds were being built in North America. And we finished the episode with the classical age of Greece and its rapid expansion under the conquest of a Macedonian named Alexander the Great. In today's episode, we cover from 300 to 100 BCE. Beginning in India with the Mauryan Empire, we'll find Ashoka the Great and the oldest written evidence of Buddhism. Traveling north to China, the shortest Chinese dynasty begins to piece together a really big wall. Back in the Mediterranean, the Roman Republic is rising to power, battling all of its neighbors, until one famous general of Carthage, with his Tunisian armies and war elephants, plans to sneak attack Rome from the north. So without further ado, let's call Ellie and continue the magnificent story of human history. The clock is set to 300 BCE.
We're almost in the CEs, Chaz. We're almost in the Common Era. Who'd have thought?
Oh my goodness. Who'd have thought? Not me.
Not me. Not
me. Literally. I can't wait to get to zero. But for now, the clock is set to 300 BCE. Who are we going to start with today?
So we are going to India, and we are going to talk about Ashoka the Great.
Okay, back to India. Cool.
Ashoka the Great is possibly the most influential Buddhist outside of Buddha. And he's sort of responsible for Buddhism becoming a major world religion. So he's born somewhere around 304 BCE as a prince of the Mauryan Empire.
I got it. Okay.
And so the Mauryan Empire is an empire that stretches across almost the entirety of modern-day India and into the surrounding lands. And it's essentially the only time that one group is ruling such a big space, ruling so much of what's the modern country of India, all the way until the British, like all the way until colonization.
Whoa. So it's much bigger than any of the Vedic groups or the Indus Valley civilization, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the Mauryan Empire gets founded by our person who we're talking about, Ashoka the Great. It gets founded by his grandfather, whose name is Chandragupta Maurya. And Chandragupta Maurya is born in about 350 BCE, and we don't really know much about it, about like his birth or his early life. But what we do know is that eventually he, and then consecutively his son and his grandson, just conquer this massive, massive space that, spreads again from almost fully south in India, like other than the very southern tip of India and Sri Lanka, and then all the way north into Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And he just, rules that entire area. He's
conquering various groups across that whole space, including some of the like Vedic cultures that we were talking about in previous episodes?
Yes,
Is that
absolutely.
What's going on?
And it's like a conglomeration of like, some parts of it are already united under smaller empires, and then there's kingdoms, and then there's more nomadic groups, and then, the whole, like if you think over to the northwestern part of that land is the part that Alexander the Great had taken over, so it's like, it's a conglomeration of different cultures and peoples, which is going to, become important.
Okay.
So Chandragupta Maurya establishes this gigantic empire with a capital city in what's now northeastern India, at a city called Pataliputra. Okay. And he divides his empire into provinces with princes as viceroys, does all the sort of standard empire moves, like builds better roads and establishes really elaborate trade routes that, connect India to the Mediterranean world and all over, standardizes all kinds of things like how birth and death records are kept and our weights and measures and all that kind of thing. Builds a massive, massive standing army. That's sort of one of the things that the Mauryan Empire is famous for, is just having like 600,000 foot soldiers and 30,000 cavalry, as well as, of course, elephants, thousands of war elephants.
So he's kind of rolling through all these disparate groups that you were saying before, conquering all of them. Chandragupta Maurya is doing this and then standardizing all the different sort of cultural practices as well.
Exactly. And
sort of standard empire building.
Yeah, let me clarify, because he doesn't standardize all the cultural practices necessarily. He standardizes like, this is how you're going to pay me taxes, and we're all going to use the same units of measurement and stuff. But he doesn't necessarily say everybody's going to speak the same language, everybody's going to worship the same gods, etc.
Okay.
And so that's really important, because this is the empire that Ashoka the Great inherits. So fast forwarding a bit to 270 BCE, Ashoka the Great comes into power.
Right.
And again, the empire is wildly diverse. As we were just saying, in parts of it, it's very Hellenistic. They're speaking Greek because it used to be part of Alexander the Great's empire. There's huge parts of it that are very Persian. There's huge parts of it where its Vedic cultures are prominent. When Ashoka the Great comes into power, the stories about him anyway are that at first he's unbelievably brutal. There's these stories that are possibly exaggerated in order to make a point, but it's like, if a woman turns him down, he burns her at the stake, like that kind of thing. And like, he comes to power by killing 96 of his brothers. And he, holds these battles in which 100,000 people die. And surely those things aren't necessarily true literally, but the point is he sort of raised a spoiled, vicious prince or whatever.
Right.
Then he's standing on one of these battlefields, having led his men to victory, but a brutal victory, and just realizes like, this can't be the way. Like, this can't be the way he wants to live his life, the way that humans should treat each other, anything like that. Not the kind of leader that he wants to be. So he has this sort of very dramatic conversion. He just renounces armed conquest and instead embraces conquest by Dhamma, which means basically he's going to lead through ideas instead of through violence.
What a novel concept.
I know. It's like quite...
I suppose it is, actually. Yeah.
Quite radical, frankly.
Right.
So Dhamma is the Prakrit word for the Sanskrit word dharma. And they mostly mean the same thing, but Dhamma means sort of the truth of the way that things are, like the natural order of things. And so in terms of people and behavior, what it means is sort of ethics, like the natural order of things is to behave with compassion, like piously and ethically. And so Ashoka the Great has embraced Dhamma, wants people to follow the rules of right behavior, specifically the rules of Buddhism as laid out by the Buddha. So be generous, be kind, especially to the elderly, especially to the vulnerable. You have a duty to your people, to each other, and we should practice nonviolence to all living things, not just people.
Wow.
Yeah, so the story is he spends the whole rest of his reign teaching and encouraging people how to live according to these principles. And very much leads by example. He spends his reign building hospitals, planting fruit trees so that people have food, digging wells so people have water. He brings gifts to the elderly. He builds schools, including schools for women. He starts food programs. He cares for travelers and for people in rural areas instead of just the people in cities. And then he also spends time going out on pilgrimages to various holy sites, as well as just traveling to talk to his people, like to just see his actual subjects. And imagine. And he says, I consider how I may bring happiness to the people, not only to relatives of mine or residences of my capital city, but also to those who are far removed from me. I act in the same manner with respect to all. I am concerned similarly with all classes. Moreover, I have honored all religious sects with various offerings. I consider it my principal duty to visit the people personally.
Nice.
So he has very much embraced Buddhism, but he's like, that's my religion, and everybody needs to respect each other's.
Okay.
And goes so far as to say, whoever praises his own religion due to excessive devotion and condemns others with the thought, let me glorify my own religion, only harms his own religion. One should listen and respect the doctrines professed by others. And so where are these quotes that I'm reading from? That's our next question. And where they're from is what's known as Ashoka's edicts. And so across his huge empire, there are at least 33, although we're still finding them, so there may be more. 33 inscriptions on pillars, on rock faces, on cave walls that talk about what he did. They talk about his deeds, and they also talk about his advice and messaging to his people, like be tolerant of each other. These are spread out all the way across Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan. And one of the things that's so interesting about these edicts is that they're actually the oldest writing that we have in India, other than sort of ancient scripts like the writing of the Indus River Valley civilization.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so, of course, we've talked about these other compositions like the Vedas, but those have been oral. You know, and there's so much sort of rich kind of literary and religious and philosophical composition in India, but they're not actually like writing at this point. And so the Edicts of Ashoka are actually the oldest written evidence that we have of Buddhism.
Oh, okay.
And then also just one thing that just makes them kind of interesting is just that means that the people who actually saw these edicts, and presumably they were composed for, wouldn't have been able to read them.
Right.
And so historians speculate that there were people whose job it was to just stand next to them and explain what they said to people.
Just to stand next to them,
basically just to stand next to an edict and read it out loud to people who saw it.
Cool.
So as well as the edicts that he puts up all over his actual empire, Ashoka the Great also sends Buddhist texts as well as actual Buddhist missionaries all over, way outside the realms of his empire, all through South Asia, all the way to North Africa and Hellenistic Greece, just kind of all over the place, really is responsible for the spread of Buddhism throughout the world.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah. And then he dies sometime in the 230s BCE. And the story is that at this point, he's given away everything. Like he's given away all of his possessions, all of his money, all of his wealth, such that on his deathbed, all he has is half a piece of fruit. And on his deathbed, somebody asks him for that half a piece of fruit, and he gives even that away. The Mauryan Empire only lasts for another 50 years after the death of Ashoka the Great. And already during that time, it's starting to shrink. Pieces of it, are breaking off, declaring independence. Eventually, in 185 BCE, the last king of the Mauryan Empire is killed by his Brahmin commander-in-chief. And then a new dynasty, that commander-in-chief founds a new dynasty.
I see.
And so at that point, Buddhism largely fades in India, or is squashed in India. However, of course, because Ashoka the Great had sent all those texts and the missionaries, etc., sort of from, Africa to, all the way east in South Asia, Buddhism is alive and well in other parts of the world.
India.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, in India itself, it begins to fade at this point, and in fact is never really widespread in India again.
It's interesting to think about the contrast between Ashoka's edicts and the public writings of other empires we've talked about in earlier episodes. If you think back to the Assyrians, for example, they used public plaques to specifically brag about their brutality. It's a striking contrast to say you're the kindest versus saying you're the scariest. There's surely truth in all these various inscriptions. There's also surely exaggeration and myth. After all, they're made by kings. But even if they are only PR, it's very different to say, follow me, I'm righteous and we can take care of each other and live in a gentler world, versus saying, follow me or I'll flay you all alive and pile the bodies at my gates. Okay, so leaving India there and the end of the Mauryan dynasty, what else is happening in the world between 300 and 100 BCE?
So we're going to go further east, and we're going to talk about the Qin Dynasty in China.
Okay, sweet. This one I think I know a little bit about.
Yeah, that seems possible. He's quite famous, or
yes.
It's quite famous.
Right.
So this is the dynasty that's sort of credited with the unification of China. This is in so many ways viewed as the foundation of China. So if you remember back when we were talking about in episode 6, back when we were talking about Confucius, we talked about the Warring States period.
Yep.
And so, as you can imagine, that was a very volatile time. It's named the Warring States because a lot of what is China is cracked into these kind of 7 different groups that are just constantly in conflict. They're just constantly warring with each other. So hence Warring States period. As we said, it's also the age of philosophers, also all this incredible thought and, writing is occurring in the midst of all this war. Both are true at the same time.
Right. You said the 100 contention of the 100
schools of thought. Yeah. So good.
Yeah. That's my favorite name for anything ever.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So the Qin Dynasty is founded by Qin Shi Huang, which again is a title. That's not his actual name. And he's also frequently referred to as Shi Huangdi. And he establishes this dynasty in 221 BCE by uniting these 7 warring factions. Okay. And never forget that the word uniting is a code word for violently taking over a group of people.
For winning the war.
For winning the war, exactly. Yeah. But having said that, now he's united them. Now they're one empire. And so what does he do? Much like we were just talking about in India, he immediately begins standardizing things. So he standardizes weights and measures, which emperors love to standardize weights and measures. Mm-hmm. He builds thousands and thousands of miles of roads. He standardizes the coinage. He standardizes things like the weaponry, which is one of the reasons his army is so effective, because if you can imagine, if you're a soldier and a piece of your weapon breaks, if it can be immediately fixed because everything is the same.
Sure.
Yeah, it can be way more efficient. So all the parts of the spears, fit together just so, or whatever. He standardizes the writing system. That's huge. And then, interestingly, he standardizes the length of wagon axles and chariot axles, which I think is so interesting. And the reason is because then the ruts on the road are in the same place always.
Right.
Which weirdly makes roads like way safer.
Totally.
Than if they're just all over the place.
And just quickly, the writing system that you said he standardizes, that's following from the oracle bones, carrying on. This is a glyph system. This is Chinese characters.
Yeah. And okay. I mean, and they've evolved significantly since the oracle bones. But yeah, this is basically like the writing system that then is like being used until the 1900s.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
And so another huge thing that he does is begin the construction of the first wall that's called the Great Wall.
Okay. This is the Great Wall of China here that you can see from outer space or whatever.
Yes, it is, but also it isn't. And I'll come back to why it isn't in 1 second.
Okay.
So in fact, when Qin Shi Huang comes to power, already across China are a series of smaller walls, smaller, simpler earthen walls.
Mm-hmm.
What Qin Shi Huang does is unite all those various smaller sections of walls into one, or at least begin the construction to do that.
Okay, he's connecting and making them stronger and all that.
Exactly. Fortifying, connecting, etc., building new sections.
Okay.
So he's taking all these separate walls and being like, we're going to have one great wall, one huge wall that's a barrier on the northern part of the empire, protecting us from nomadic people on the other side who might try to invade.
Sure. And as you said, now there's a unified China
yes,
to the south.
Us protecting us from them. Exactly.
So we don't need all the walls in between. Okay, I get it. Okay.
Yeah. And so the reason that I say it isn't the Great Wall of China is because the one that you're picturing in your head when I say that is a rebuilding of this wall that happened during the Ming Dynasty. And so that wall was constructed a full 1,000 years after this episode or more. And we'll circle back to it in like episode 17 or something. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, this is like the first time that somebody tries to unify all those separate pieces of wall, starts constructing the Great Wall, and every dynasty after the Qin adds to it and continues the construction of it.
Mm-hmm. And is referring to it as the
Great Wall. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay. And so, of course, importantly, how are massive construction projects like that done in the BCEs?
Labor.
Yeah, just massive amounts of human labor. And of course, it's quite dangerous. Mm-hmm. And you don't necessarily get a lot of choice in whether or not you want to go build the wall.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's an ancient Chinese myth called Mengjiang-nu, which is set during the time of Qin Shi Huang, and it illustrates the tragedy of the laborers working to construct this massive wall. Mengjiang-nu is the name of a young woman who has recently fallen in love and gotten married. Shortly after their wedding, her husband is forcibly sent across China to labor on the wall. One night, she dreams he's freezing, and so she sets out north on a long, perilous journey to bring him winter clothes. She finally arrives at the foot of the wall, only to learn that her husband has already died from exhaustion and cold. Heartbroken, Mengjiang-nu weeps for days and days until a large section of the wall collapses under her tears. And beneath the collapsed wall are the buried bones of countless laborers. Like all folktales, the story of Mengjiang-nu and her bitter weeping has many variations, but all of them illustrate the tragedy and danger of the forced labor used to build Emperor Qin's Great Wall.
Qin Shi Huang is remembered as just an unbelievable tyrant.
Right.
Just like a brutal, brutal leader. He embraces legalism, which is this political theory, this belief system that arose during the contention of the 100 Schools of Thought. And the idea is that people have to be motivated by their own self-interest. So people are inclined to do the wrong thing unless they're forced to do the right thing. is the idea.
Got it.
So
Okay.
the whole thing is just based on rigid laws and sort of harsh punishments if any of the laws are broken.
I see. Okay.
So Qin Shi Huang embraces punishments from shaving your beard, like forced shaving of your beard for like a more minor infraction, to like castration or cutting off limbs or execution, for like worse crimes. So among Qin Shi Huang's biggest legacies is this sort of symbolic beginning of China. His whole thing is to kind of say everything that happened before the Qin Dynasty, everything that happened over all these different warring kingdoms and before, is irrelevant. Just wipe the slate clean. This is the Qin Dynasty and it's something new. And in some ways, he kind of gets away with that. The etymology of China is from the Qin Dynasty.
Oh, okay.
But what he does in order to wipe this slate clean is he gathers all this literature, all this philosophy, all this art, all this math and science writing, just so much of the literature that makes China's culture, and just burns it irrevocably. It's so horrible. I can't even stand it.
Yeah.
And he's also accused of taking all these important scholars and burying them alive. It's less clear that he actually did that, but burn the books and bury the scholars is a phrase that outlasted his empire as just, sort of meaning like how to be a despot, just like how to squash any intellectual diversity.
Mm-hmm. And you say irrevocably in terms of the documents that he burned because
they're lost
copies.
To us. They're lost to us forever. Yeah. And sometimes we know about them because people, there'll be sections quoted in something that survived, or something survived by being hidden in houses or whatever. But just all these like important foundational histories and pieces of literature just gone. It's so just unimaginable. Except for that it happens all the time. So I guess we should imagine it, but
yeah, but it's still unimaginable. Yeah. And just the violence of doing that to somebody's history is, especially horrendous.
Yeah. And it's weird how common it is that it's people doing it to sort of their own history. Like, it's not even like the act of like somebody colonizing another place and destroying it, which is horrible enough. Right. It's like, I am China or whatever it is.
To control your own narrative.
Control your own narrative. Yeah, exactly. And so he is also obsessed with his own mortality. Qin Shi Huang is also obsessed with his own mortality. He builds himself this stunning, at least stunningly described, we've never dug it up, tomb that is kind of a map of China. His tomb is surrounded by an army of life-size clay statues, which we now know, of course, as the terracotta warriors.
Ah, right. Okay.
So we have at least 600 sites across 22 square miles of these terracotta warriors. We've covered at least 8,000 of them. Yeah, they're life-size soldiers. We have them standing. We have them kneeling. We have archers, musicians, acrobats. We have bronze horses, bronze chariots, weaponry, etc. Yeah, it's just wild how many of them they are. And like all of the terracotta warriors are unique. Like they all have a specific face. It's not just like they were cranking out like mass producing, the same one over and over again.
What? I did not realize there were so many.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just like what possibly there's more. I don't know. But there's at least 8,000.
Jeez. I was like, there's so many. There's like 50.
No. This is like square miles underground. Yeah. I mean, it's so amazing. Whoa. Yeah. Okay, it's unreal. It's unreal.
That's ridiculous.
So Qin Shi Huang dies in 210 BCE, and the Qin Dynasty barely outlasts him. Within a few years, it falls to a rebellion and falls to the Han Dynasty. And what that means is that the Qin Dynasty only lasts for 15 years, which is just kind of amazing. It's the shortest Chinese dynasty, and it's kind of amazing because it's just so impactful. And so the last thing that I want to say about the Qin Dynasty and about Qin Shi Huang is that a lot of what we know about that dynasty and about Qin Shi Huang was written during the Han Dynasty, which, again, is the next dynasty, the dynasty that came right after. And so it's just worth noting that we have these histories of the Qin Dynasty sort of written by their conquerors.
Oh, right. I see. By Qin Shi Huang's enemies. Right.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, a group rises up and it's sort of very much in their interest to be like, do you see how they were uniquely the worst people in the world and we had to nobly rise up? And so recently, there's been more pushback from historians and scholars sort of saying we don't actually have like tons of evidence that Qin Shi Huang sat around drinking mercury trying to live forever. He certainly viewed his subjects' lives as expendable. No doubt. He certainly built, this ostentatious tomb that's, has a million terracotta warriors in it or whatever. But it's also true that...
burned all the books.
And burned the books. That one is inexcusable. But a lot of these behaviors are just not actually that unique or rare among, emperors don't tend to view their subjects' lives as precious.
I see what you're saying.
The world over,
Right. I see what you're saying. And in the beginning of the section, you were saying that he has this reputation of being just like an absolutely terrible tyrant. And like, he probably was, but also like, so were the Han or something is kind of the point you're making.
Certainly the Han Dynasty keeps building the wall and, people keep dying while, so it's not, I definitely don't want to argue that the Qin Dynasty wasn't brutal. It's just, also we need to remember that like people are unreliable when they tell the stories of people they've conquered.
Yes, I see.
And then and then people are unreliable when they tell the stories of people who have conquered them for different reasons. And people are unreliable when they tell the stories of themselves for like a third set of reasons. So it's just that's just like something to keep in mind about this story in particular. And then of course, about all of history in general.
All of history. Yeah. So leaving China there, it is unified and it has fallen to the Han. What else is happening between 300 and 100 BCE?
Well, we are going to go and talk about Rome, talk about the Roman Empire, which is really getting going.
I think about them every day. So perfect.
Every day. I have been thinking about them every day, if I'm being honest, for a while now.
Fair.
So Rome, in so many ways, was just this random town in the peninsula that's now Italy, which suddenly takes over, their entire known world. So, how and why does that happen? And a lot of it, really gets going during this episode. So that's what we're going to talk about. The first thing is that Rome sort of famously has this mythological origin story about Romulus and Remus, who are these twins who are born to a princess, placed in a basket and floated down the river. Standard move. They get to the edge of the river somehow. They're found by a wolf who raises them. And this story has 1,000 different variations. That's the general one. Their names are Romulus and Remus. Eventually they grow up. Romulus kills Remus. Hence, Rome is the city, as opposed to Rheims is the city.
Okay, I see.
And I imagine that didn't literally happen, but I think that it's worth just sharing that story because it just means that the origin story that they're pulling from is this origin story that relies on kind of a lack of parents. It's as though they came out of nowhere. These twins were sort of emerged raised by a wolf, and then there they are. Rome kind of emerges on the scene. It's not. And then what's interesting about that is that sort of much later in their history, they come up with an origin story that shows that they're actually the descendants of Greece.
I see.
And so just, keep those both in mind. On one hand, we pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps, came out of the woods with the wolf. And then on the other, actually, we're the inheritors of the most sophisticated culture in the Mediterranean, all their literature, all their art, everything. We are the natural inheritors of that. Okay. And it's kind of like those two, I feel like those are like the two sides that are like pulling at Rome a lot of the time. Sort of worth keeping those two origin stories in mind.
Interesting. Okay.
So as we said, Rome is kind of going along as a random city in what's now Italy until the mid-400s BCE. And then two events occur which sort of change Rome from being any other city to being Rome, to being sort of at least on the trajectory to being this very powerful, powerful city. And the first is that in 396, they conquer the nearby city of Veii.
Okay.
And Rome and Veii have sort of been in an on and off again war for years. And eventually Rome figures out how to tunnel under their walls, conquers the city. And the reason that that's important is that sort of suddenly Rome is 60% bigger and more powerful than it used to be, and kind of has that influence to wield in the surrounding areas.
Okay.
And then shortly following on the conquering of Veii, Rome is sacked by a group of Gauls, which are, the groups in what's now northern Italy and France. Mm-hmm. They come down, they sack the city of Rome, and in one kind of sweeping disaster, they destroy all the records of the early history of Rome. And so what that allows for is Rome to kind of have a symbolic new start. They can kind of reinvent themselves a bit and be like, this is actually the early history of Rome, without like bothering with, the early records of, whatever might have actually happened.
Sure. Gives you a time to come up with all sorts of new ideas, shed the old, all that sort of thing.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. And so then over the next 100 years, Rome essentially expands and militarizes. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing it does is it builds this huge wall around the city of Rome. It's 11 kilometers long. It's, 4 meters thick in various places, and just sort of makes the city of Rome just this very fortified, strong place.
Okay.
From that fortified, strong city, it endlessly expands, sends its armies in all directions, just sort of endlessly conquering for year after year. So all the way south into the southern parts of what's now Italy, and north until eventually it kind of has the whole peninsula. So as they're expanding and as they're conquering these people, mostly what happens is when Rome conquers a new place, they say, you can deal with yourself. We'll kind of leave you alone, but what you have to do is provide and equip troops for the Roman army.
Okay.
So basically, we need a lot of your young men, and you have to provide them with weaponry.
Okay.
What's so interesting about that is that it's a very efficient way of extracting enormous amounts of tribute, because you don't have to, it basically doesn't require administrative work. Like, you don't have to go in and, do all this nitty gritty about like wheat and barley. You can just be like, give us a ton of people.
Interesting.
But what happens because of that is that then all those young men are soldiers in the army, and therefore they have a stake in the spoils of war. So it's like a bizarrely effective way to get everyone on the side of the Roman cause. All of a sudden they're like, yay, let's go keep conquering Rome, go Rome.
Right, because when they win, I win.
I win. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It becomes a mutual cause all of a sudden. Interesting. And that's sort of a newer, or sort of a hallmark of these 100 years. Okay,
yeah,
I get it.
And so by 300 BCE, which, is the official start of this episode, Rome has 500,000 troops available to them.
Jeez.
So for context, Alexander the Great had 50,000.
So they literally have 10 times the amount.
Bizarre. And they've taken over so much that Rome becomes the richest people in the world. And I always wonder how they actually know about the world, but let's just say the richest people in the Mediterranean. I don't know.
And I wonder how you measure richness.
Well, here's one way. They're so wealthy that they eventually that the actual citizens of Rome stop having to pay taxes. Because there's just so much money pouring in that it's like taxes, schmaxes, who needs them? And so there's only taxes in, they reserve the right to raise taxes like in emergencies or whatever. But in general, they're just rolling in dough.
Okay.
Of course, a lot of that is because so much of the labor is being done by tens of thousands of enslaved people, with just more pouring in all the time. So they're fighting with the Gauls in northern Italy. Huge wars in the 220s BCE. Eventually, Rome sort of controls most of Italy. They go over and fight with Syria. Syria falls in 190 BCE. They endlessly are warring with Carthage, which we'll talk more about in a moment. That finally falls in 146 BCE. The whole time they were warring with Carthage, the Macedonians started helping them. So they're like, Rome is like, absolutely not, Macedonians, you can't help Carthage. So they have to go fight with the Macedonians. The Macedonians fall in about 168 BCE. And so then suddenly Rome controls all of Greece. And so the long and the short of it is, in this relatively short window of time, all of a sudden, without Carthage and without Greece, there's basically no competitor. Suddenly they are just like ruling the Mediterranean. This whole time period of Roman history, the time period we're covering in this episode, the time period from 509 BCE to 27 BCE, is called the Roman Republic, to differentiate it from the Roman kingdom before it and the Roman Empire after it.
Okay.
And during the Roman Republic, the government is run by two consuls. There's two people, two men, let's be honest, who are the head of the Senate, and they run the military. And they are changed out every year. They're elected every year. And they're frequently, quite intense rivals. That's part of the point. And situations like that are not unheard of. There's two kings in Sparta, for example, or Carthage, which we're about to talk about, has kind of similar, like, divide the power purposely. But it is very notable, and it's like a big thing in Rome that they're always trying to figure out how to keep one person from consolidating all the power.
Okay.
Having said that, you can temporarily appoint a dictator, usually in a time of crisis. So if there's like a terrible war, they're like, we need one person who's just calling all the shots to help us through this time of crisis. And then you go back to I know, I find that really interesting. And so the last thing that I want to talk about in this episode's coverage of Rome is actual Roman society, the actual people. And the sort of overarching question of who is a Roman. And there's no simple answer to that question, and it changes a lot over the course of the Roman kingdom and the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire.
Okay.
So the first distinction I want to make is that among Roman citizens are two major classes of people, the patricians and the plebeians. And the patricians are the fancy people. They're the upper class, the wealthy, the landowners,
The elite.
The elite. The plebeians are the vast majority of the people. They're all the working class of Rome are the plebeians.
Okay.
Over the course of the Roman Republic, that distinction gets smaller and smaller, the distinction between the patricians and the plebeians.
Okay.
Then there's also many other groups, like women are Roman citizens. However, they cannot vote and they can't be in the Senate.
Okay. So citizen doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed the right to vote.
Yeah. Not if you're a woman.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a massive, massive class of enslaved people who are frequently prisoners of war or debtors or people who have committed a crime of some kind, or those people's children. Anybody born to an enslaved woman is also enslaved.
Okay.
However, you can be granted your freedom or buy your freedom. And so once you've been freed as from slavery, you're then a Roman citizen.
Right. Okay.
However, you're at the very bottom of the plebeian class. Again, over generations, that can change dramatically.
Right.
So historians guess that by the end of the Roman Empire, in several hundred years, more than half of the Roman citizenry is a descendant of an enslaved ancestor.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that was pretty common.
Yeah, quite common. Yeah, exactly. And so then also there's just the question of all the various people that they're conquering. Are they Roman? Are they not? And the question gets answered differently all the time. Frequently there becomes all these different sort of classes of they're sort of like a citizen in the sense that you can marry them, for example, or they have the right to do this, but they don't have the right to do that. They can't vote or whatever. There ends up being all these sort of gradations. And what seems to be true is that over time, the definition of who gets to be a Roman expands rather than shrinks. And that becomes a defining aspect of the Roman Empire, is that they've kind of conquered you and now you're Roman. And so that comes with all these incredible perks, such that a lot of people just kind of go with it. And then, of course, it also comes with now give us a lot of money and send us your sons and etc. Right. And I'm sure that it was not a good time at all to be conquered by Rome. But, it's certainly not true. If you think about modern examples, if you think about the British Empire, it's not as though the British Empire was just invading countries all over the world and then granting everyone in those countries British citizenship.
True. Okay.
That is not what they were doing.
Absolutely.
You may or may not want British citizenship from your invader, but it's just it is actually a kind of radical thing to be doing. And Rome was doing it, out of self-interest as much as anything else. It was be Roman, give us soldiers, etc. It's not like they were just so big-hearted, but it is a radically different thing to do than just to colonize the way our modern ears hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. Fascinating. Okay, so more or less we've caught up to this episode in terms of Rome, and we're going to leave it there and revisit it.
Yeah.
Ad nauseum, shall we say.
Every day we got to think about it.
Toss in a little Latin for you. One last thing about Roman citizenship that's always fascinated me is a policy known as the grain dole. Rome established the grain dole in the later years of the Republic. This policy allowed adult male citizens to buy a certain allotment of grain at a very cheap government-subsidized price. A politician named Gaius Gracchus initially proposed the idea because he believed that the people of Rome, including the plebeians, deserved Rome's resources. Over time, as you can imagine, the grain dole policy required increasingly complex infrastructure and record-keeping to ensure fair distribution to citizens. However, as the Republic turned to an empire, critics dismissed the grain dole as a trick, used by the empire to dull the people into a stupor. This is where we get the famous phrase, bread and circuses, by which they meant, give your populace cheap food and entertainment, and they will willingly cede their civil rights and won't notice that their leaders are, quote, incompetent tyrants. Either way, the grain dole was another reason it was an enormous privilege to have the status of citizen Romanus. So as we head into the last segment of the episode, quick recap. So far we've covered India and China and the beginnings of the Roman Republic. Who is the last group to cover between 300 and 100 BCE?
So we are going to go to Northern Africa, to the country that's now Tunisia, and we're going to talk about Carthage.
Carthage, right? The Phoenician city from 2 episodes ago?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So exactly that. As, we talked about a few episodes ago, we talked about the Phoenicians who invent the alphabet and are obsessed with the purple dye made from snails. And as they're sailing all over the Mediterranean, they establish the city of Carthage in what's now Tunisia.
Right.
So that all happened back in 814 BCE. And so now Carthage as a city has existed for hundreds of years. So Carthage is in the very north of Tunisia, which juts into the Mediterranean Sea. It juts north into the Mediterranean Sea. And then right to the north of it is the island of Sicily.
Right. You cross the Mediterranean, a small strip, and you get to Sicily.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. That gap is pretty small. It's only a couple hundred kilometers. And therefore, all these various peoples who are trying to get all around the Mediterranean have to go through this little channel almost between Carthage and Sicily. And as such, it's just so ideally positioned.
Strategic.
And becomes this very important, very powerful city over, these hundreds of years since its founding. And then, as we talked about, the main Phoenician city of Tyre, like back in Canaan, falls to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And then after that, Carthage really is the center of the whole Phoenician world.
I see.
It kind of like its mother city sort of vanishes, or its mother culture kind of, is assimilated into, it's conquered. And so I want to give you a little picture of the city and sort of life in Carthage, and then tell the story of kind of its end, how it falls to Rome. If you were looking at the city of Carthage from an airplane, from above, you would see this city surrounded by massive walls. And inside the city, it's laid out on a grid.
Okay.
Then right to the north, of course, is the Mediterranean Sea. And then the harbor, which connects the Mediterranean to the city itself, is shaped almost like a lollipop or something. It has like a long, thin part, and then it opens into a circle.
Okay.
And the circle is huge, like 200 boats can fit inside of it or something. But its entrance into, the stick of the lollipop is only about 20 meters across. It's quite small.
Okay.
And what they can do is hang chains across those 20 meters.
Gotcha.
And essentially close their harbor.
Right. So any boat coming in and out of the harbor of Carthage has to go through that channel. And if the chains are there, it's just impossible.
They can't do it. So it's quite fortified, between the walls around the city and then these chains across the harbor. It's like you can't get to it.
Sure.
And then inside this city is just a massive, bustling, cosmopolitan urban center. There's people living there from all over North Africa, from all around the Mediterranean. At its height, it probably has about 400,000 people living in it.
It sounds like, based on the description of the city, that you're kind of saying Carthage has become its own thing now. It's not necessarily the Phoenician city of Carthage, or maybe it was founded that way, but at this point it's got its own identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It has its own identity, its own population. People have been marrying people from all over the Mediterranean as well as all over North Africa now for hundreds of years. So it's just like Carthage now, and the Carthaginians. And, the Phoenicians are just like a initial founding.
The founders.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Okay.
Carthage has a government with several branches. There's a tribunal of judges called the Tribunal of the 104, or just 104. It has a senate or a council of elders. They have an executive position, which is held by 2 elected people simultaneously, sort of similar to what we were just saying about Rome. What's interesting about their government is that it's a requirement. Everyone in the government is wealthy. Like, you have to be wealthy. And the idea behind that is that they think if you're poor, you don't have time to attend to the people's needs. And also, you're susceptible to bribery.
Right. Versus rich people who are just completely immune
to corruption.
To bribery and corruption.
Famously immune.
Famously. Yeah, they're well known.
Yeah. I mean, I know. It totally makes sense to me how that is like a theoretical win.
Right, in theory, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely bites them, at various points, because the rich people are just like, I don't care what's happening to the poor people. Just bring me more silver.
Yeah. Right.
They have a pretty big standing army. And what's interesting about their standing army is that it's all mercenary soldiers. Like, they're all paid soldiers rather than just like every 18-year-old male has to be a soldier or whatever. So slavery was very common, which, is practically a given throughout all of history, unfortunately. And you could be born into slavery, but you also, many of the enslaved people were conquered people. And so, of course, slavery is always brutal. It is also true that they could buy their freedom, potentially. And so to be one of these mercenary soldiers we were just talking about in the standing army is a way in which you could earn your freedom.
I see.
So many of the mercenary soldiers, were like previously enslaved people trying to get their freedom. Carthage has this rich literary tradition. This is such an important part of its culture. It has libraries of works on logic and metaphysics and history and literature. It's like how you picture the Library of Alexandria with like stars around it or whatever. It's like that.
It's cool to think about that, especially in a city which has so many cultures coming and going from all the different places in this, intersecting world.
Totally. Yeah. Completely. Because that's the thing. Again, I mean, the manuscripts and scholars are like coming into the city every day, from all over the Mediterranean, certainly Greece, the rest of the Hellenistic world. Just, the Phoenicians' world was so big and varied and rich. So the last thing that's important to say about the people of Carthage before we get to the actual history of their fall is that they are the true descendants of the Phoenicians in terms of their ability to sail.
Right.
They're just incredibly famous for their craft with boats, for their ability to build them and their ability to sail them. Right. And so they sort of famously trade, explore, set up colonies, etc., all over the Mediterranean. They even sail out through the Strait of Gibraltar and all the way up to England, maybe even to Ireland, and all the way south around the Bulge of Africa to the Niger Delta.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. And there's even speculation that they sail all the way around South Africa and up the other side, although that's less clear if that actually happened. But anyway, amazing sailors.
Yeah. Cool.
And so now to just ridiculously oversimplify their history, for a long time, Carthage and Greece are sort of the major powerhouses in the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, and they battle a lot over who gets to rule the Mediterranean. And those wars are referred to by modern historians as the Sicilian Wars or the Greco-Punic Wars.
Okay, I see. Right.
And then, as we know, Greece falls, Alexander the Great dies, empires fall, etc. And Rome rises. And then Rome and Carthage fight endlessly over who gets to rule the Mediterranean.
I see. Right. Makes sense.
And those wars are referred to by modern historians as the Punic Wars. For a while, Carthage is doing fine in these wars. And then in 265 BCE, Rome captures one of Carthage's warships.
Okay.
They copy it, and within 2 months, they have a fleet of their own.
Geez.
Yeah, Rome is like, I don't even know what to say about Rome.
No chill.
Yeah, no, that is definitely what they don't have, is any chill.
So Rome essentially takes one of Carthage's ships and copies the design.
Exactly. Because, of course, Carthage is the one with the unbelievably exceptional skill and technology with boats. And so Rome is like, we'll take one of your boats, we'll copy it. And then suddenly they're a much more formidable foe in naval warfare.
Got you. Okay.
And so the Punic Wars have been endlessly written about, but in terms of this first one, they're largely battling over Sicily, and all that you really need to know about it is that it's a very expensive war and that Carthage loses it. Rome's whole thing when it's beaten you in a war is to make a peace treaty that has such absurd terms, such expensive terms, that there's no possible way you'll keep up your end of the peace treaty. And so inevitably, the loser of the war reneges on the peace treaty, and then Rome is like, oh, I can't believe you broke our peace treaty. And then they have to come and like do something terrible to you and, use that as an excuse
Finish
to oppress
you off.
you. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
And so because of that very expensive peace treaty, Carthage is just in dire financial straits. It puts them into a civil war, etc. And the way that empires in general get out of dire financial straits is, of course, constant expansion. And so what they do is invade the Iberian Peninsula. They just conquer Spain.
Carthage just conquers Spain.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
So at this point in the story, we're going to kind of change our story to being about Hannibal. And if you've heard of one person from Carthage, it's Hannibal. So Hannibal is brought along on this let's go conquer Spain journey by his father when he's 10 years old.
Okay.
And he sort of grows up amidst this war. Then when he's 18 years old, his father, who's the general of this invasion, dies, and he kind of inherits the invasion. Like it's suddenly his job to keep, invading on behalf of Carthage, which, of course he hasn't actually set foot in since he was 10.
And Hannibal's only 18 at this point.
And Hannibal's only 18.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
right. Okay.
Nevertheless, luckily or unluckily or whatever, he's a genius. And so he keeps going relatively successfully. And he's looking around and he's like, someone needs to do something about Rome. Rome is increasingly taking over the world. It's harassing Carthage directly, and it's harassing Carthage indirectly by just competing with it for the same things that both cities want. Somebody has to do something. And he's in Spain, and he's like, I could just cross the Pyrenees and the Alps and come at Rome from the north. And so then that's exactly what he does. He goes up north through Spain, he goes across southern France, and then down into Italy that way. And this is the famous Hannibal crossing the Alps with his elephants and his army.
In case you haven't heard of Hannibal and his elephants, one interesting aspect of this story is that his elephants and war elephants in general are often remembered by Western scholars as borderline silly. They're characterized as an impractical gimmick. In many ways, this is true about the elephants of the Punic Wars. In crucial battles with Rome, Carthage's elephants were easily trapped or tricked into trampling their own troops. And in the story Ellie just mentioned, most of Hannibal's elephants died in the Alps. As with many historical narratives, though, the Roman perspective has become accepted as the truth about war elephants in general. However, the reality is, elephants have been crucial to militaries in other parts of the world for millennia. This is especially true in India, which effectively used their native species of Indian elephant for thousands of years. As Ellie said in the beginning of the episode, the Mauryan Empire had 9,000 elephants. They had an entire governmental branch dedicated to their care, maintaining empire-wide infrastructure to house and feed them. Elephants certainly require an enormous investment. They require extensive training and massive amounts of food and water. However, from that investment, India got gentle and intelligent beasts of burden, which could carry more supplies than even a horse. A practically unstoppable tank of an animal that could scatter even a phalanx, and an expensive and impressive status symbol, literally elevating generals above their troops, frightening and inspiring foot soldiers in equal parts. So, in spite of Rome's insistence that they were a useless gimmick, and the fact that most of Hannibal's elephants did die in the Alps, other militaries, in fact, used them quite effectively. They were a useful and vital part of the Indian army all the way until the 1800s.
I'm curious too, is as Hannibal is conquering Spain and then goes across France and then is going to try to go into northern Italy, he's conquering Celts that whole time? Who's he like fighting?
So as we talked about in episode 6, who the Celts are in their own eyes versus who the Celts are in other people's eyes is like not always the same. So yes, for sure, Hannibal was fighting Celtic people, Iberian people. As he was getting north into France, he was fighting Gauls. It's much less clear how many of these groups would have referred to themselves and, if they viewed themselves as one people or many, many peoples. What's definitely true is that as he went along, many of them joined him.
Sure, because they're like, we want to get Rome too.
Yeah, and especially after Hannibal actually gets and starts engaging with the Roman army and starts winning battles, then many people are just like, oh yeah, sign us up because we also would like somebody to do something about Rome.
I see.
So because we're rushing, because this is World History 24, we're not going to get into all the ins and outs of how this war unfolds. But I do want to do something unusual, which is talk about one battle really quickly, because it's among the most famous battles ever fought anywhere. It's endlessly talked about still in army classrooms or whatever, debated. And it's
I'm
just
write another jingle called Ellie Summarizes a Major Battle.
Well, and I don't want to get too specific about it.
Okay,
but it's this battle, the Battle of Cannae is what it's called. And the important thing to know is just that 55,000 Romans die, at least. There's different numbers given in different places. And it's just Hannibal just employs all these brilliant military tactics and takes advantage of mountain passes and fog. And Rome just makes a horrible blunder and tens of thousands of people die.
Jeez.
And almost no people from Carthage die. And so the reason this battle, the Battle of Cannae, is so important is because there's this moment, the next day when Rome hears that 55,000 of their soldiers have been killed. And they assume Hannibal is coming to take the city.
Of course. Right. This is the moment.
And Hannibal's advisors say, let's go take the city.
Okay.
And for whatever combination of reasons that we can't see into the past, to reflect upon, he doesn't do it. Hannibal does not take that moment to attack Rome.
Even though in that moment, it's pretty likely that Hannibal would have won.
Yes, or at least that's what's been debated for 2,000 years. And
I see.
So it's just this wild moment of Hannibal might have taken the city of Rome. Rome might have fallen. There might have never been a Roman Empire.
And we just don't really know why Hannibal would have not taken that moment. That was his whole mission.
Yeah, we don't. He was like, well, I need more resources. I'm going to go conquer more of southern Italy, free more of southern Italy from Rome and have a bigger army when I get to Rome. But in fact, sort of spoiler, he never does. The Carthage eventually falls. Rome obviously doesn't ever fall to Hannibal. And it's just the idea, there's so many moments in history that are these big epic forces or of course, this is what would happen next. And then there's these other moments in history where one person makes a decision. And, we don't know what might have happened, but it's very likely Rome would have fallen. And I just can't even imagine what the modern world would look like if you just removed the Roman Empire from it. It's just actually unimaginable. So just to finish the story, though, of Carthage and, of Hannibal. Hannibal spends 18 years in total in Italy in various wars, but he never does take Rome. Rome keeps growing. Their empire keeps expanding. They eventually conquer Spain. They push Carthage out of the Iberian Peninsula, and then they rule the whole thing. They eventually push Hannibal and all his troops out of Italy. Hannibal goes back to Northern Africa. There's many battles, and sort of eventually that war, the war that was sort of Hannibal versus Rome, ends. As we said before, Rome's whole thing is to come up with like absurd peace agreements that can't possibly be followed. And so they make, at the end of the war with Hannibal, they make one of these peace agreements, another one of these peace agreements that's just absurd. And nevertheless, even under those kind of brutal circumstances, Carthage manages to last for like another 40 years. And then this Roman senator is visiting the city, and he realizes that Carthage is kind of okay. He's like, Carthage is supposed to be under our thumb. We made this super mean peace agreement where they're supposed to be like poverty stricken and sad all the time. And instead, this is like a thriving city. And he's just so annoyed about it. And so yeah, I know. It's just like, what is wrong with Rome? I don't know. So he's this senator named Cato, and he, from then on, when he's in the Roman Senate, no matter what he's talking about, if he's talking about like taxes or like wheat yields or whatever, he ends every speech with, "Furthermore, I advise that Carthage must be destroyed."
You got to have your shtick, I suppose.
You do. And you just have to be like, for no reason, I don't want them happy. Right. Let's just go burn them to the ground.
Cannot possibly thrive.
So Rome eventually capitulates to Cato's, desire to conquer Carthage. Rome does come and invade, and Carthage holds out for 3 whole years under siege.
Wow.
But eventually, Rome breaches the city walls and 60,000 people are killed.
Jeez.
And 50...
In a city of only like 400,000, you said.
Yeah. And 50,000 people are sold into slavery, and the city is burned and pulled down like brick by brick, just decimated.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just unbelievably sad. The Roman general who was like in charge of this supposedly cried while he was watching it happen. And he quotes Hector's wife from the Iliad saying like, "A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish and Priam and his people shall be slain." Meaning he's like seeing the fall of his own city. Like he's seeing the fall of Rome in this, like just watching this unbelievably beautiful, important city,
historic place,
being decimated, and just being like, oh, eventually it will be our turn. Like, empires fall.
Wow.
It's so sad, especially because when you think about, we talked about their rich literary tradition. There is no writing from Carthage surviving. None.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just all of it just destroyed. Wow. It's so awful.
Wow.
Like, it's just so awful.
Right. So the Romans set about to destroy all the writing, and they just do.
Oh, totally. They were just like, wipe Carthage off the map. Like, how dare they exist? I don't know. How dare they question us? How dare they almost attack us?
What a horrible theme for this episode.
The burning of books. I know. It truly, totally. I know it's weird because like, I feel like in doing the research for this podcast, like over and over and over again, it's just like, there's a city and then somebody conquers it and kills and enslaves everybody. It's just like, you read that over and over and over again. And for some reason, when I was reading this one, I just like started crying. I was like, just the idea that you watched like the enemy at your gates for 3 years, just like knowing probably you're going to lose.
Right. It's going to happen. Yeah.
like how
And
terrifying
what
that
it's
would
like
be.
when they lose.
Yeah,
when
they're just going to go
right.
through like street by street, killing and enslaving every single person. I mean, it's just so
Yeah, it's really
nightmarish.
intense.
And like the idea that it just happens over and over and over. Like,
Yeah.
it couldn't be a more common story.
Yeah. That is.
I was like thinking of Helm's Deep. And
right.
I mean, that's literally
right.
what I was thinking of, is just like all
Yeah.
these people just like huddled.
Yeah.
It's so sad. It's just unbearable.
Yeah. Well, is that the end of the story of Carthage there?
That is the end of the story of Carthage.
Carthage falls to Rome. Rome now controls
the Mediterranean,
Italy,
basically, as we were
Spain,
saying. Yeah.
Carthage, Northern Africa, Sicily, right? It controls the entire Mediterranean, the passages between it.
Okay. And still doesn't control the Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires, though.
Right. Good point. Yes, totally. So, yeah, the Hellenistic Egypt and Persia, the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires are still holding out, fighting back.
Okay. Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Cool. That's the end of episode 8, I suppose.
That's the end. Yeah, that's the end of episode 8. It's kind of a sad note.
The clock is now wound all the way up to 100 BCE. Do we get to the inflection point?
We get to the inflection
episode?
point. We sure do. Yeah.
Oh,
yep.
boy.
We absolutely do.
All right, strap in.
Yep.
And with that, we come to the end of our 8th call, covering the years from 300 to 100 BCE. We talked about Ashoka the Great, Emperor Qin, the Roman Republic, the city of Carthage, and its most famous general, Hannibal. In our next episode, we'll cover from 100 BCE to 100 CE. We'll tell the stories of Cleopatra, Boudica, and the one-eyed Kandake, all powerful women resisting Rome. Rome, meanwhile, turns from a republic to an empire. We'll tell the story of the Trung sisters and the origins of Vietnam. And in Peru, the Nazca culture is covering the desert in stunning geoglyphs. And of course, passing from BCE to CE means we'll cover the life of Jesus, the beginnings of Christianity, and the Roman destruction of Jerusalem.
Bye, Ellie.
Bye, Charlie.
World History 24 is written and researched by Ellie Cazella. I do the production and music. Our logo and design work is done by Alyssa Alarcon-Santo. For links to any sources mentioned in the episode, as well as lots of fascinating extra material, visit worldhistory24.com. You can also find information there about how to support this podcast. That's worldhistory24.com. My name is Charlie Cazella, and on behalf of myself and my sister, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next hour.